Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in. My name is Doug. I host and direct and produce a lot of the Free League YouTube content. I'm very excited for this first session for Spiel Digital that is coming up. We've got 3 jam-packed days of content heading your way. Thank you so much for tuning into this. I'm just going to remind folks that if you would like to see more of our content, please hit that like button, subscribe, and hit that little bell notification that'll let you know every single time we go live or upload new content, especially with these next few days that are coming up with Spiel Digital. Well, as we were trying to prepare for this event, we were coming up with all sorts of different ideas for panels, and now that Free League has 3 of my most favorite fantasy RPGs in-house, I thought that maybe we should have a panel with some of the greatest fantasy RPG designers and creators in the industry that are working with Free League Publishing, and so we decided we'd do this panel that we're going to kick off here in just a few moments. I am a big fantasy RPG player fan, but I also have a friend that is also probably an even bigger fantasy RPG fan. His name is Matt. He does the Free League Twitch channel. I'm going to bring him on. Matt, thank you so much for coming on. You're gonna host this panel. I'm a little jealous.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
You've got some amazing minds and creators and designers on this panel, and man, yeah, we wanted to have you on. You're doing some great work with the Free League Twitch channel. Thank you so much for giving your time to host this. I'm going to let folks know that if you have any questions for this panel, we're going to probably address those about halfway through. If you have any comments and everything, leave them in the chat, and I'll try to feed them through about halfway through. We'll try to address those. But yeah, Matt, thanks for coming on. I'm going to duck out and be behind the scenes until about halfway through. And yeah, enjoy your panel. I'm really, really excited.
Thank you so much. All right, welcome everybody. Welcome to Essen Spiel. It's my first Essen. It's exciting to be here. And I have this amazing panel for my first Essen Spiel. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining me. I'm going to go around. I'm going to butcher all their names. I'm going to introduce them. And then we're going to get started. Like Doug said, this is like an everything fantasy panel. It's not just about their games. We're going to talk about fantasy and all of the great fantasy games that Free League publishes. We have the newest edition here today with the One Ring, which is exciting. So first, to my right, looking at the screen, is Erik Granstörm behind Forbidden Lands, which is my personal favorite Free League game. So it is very exciting to have you here. I've been running it for quite a while. I actually have the map on the wall next to me for Forbidden Lands, and I'm getting ready to ramp up and run Bitter Reach on the Twitch channel soon. So
thanks.
Very
nice
exciting. Excellent. Next, we have Mattias Johnsson Haake. I hope I said that right.
That's good enough.
Okay. Of Symbaroum fame. Thank you for joining us. And last but not least, we have the newest member of the family, Francesco Nepitello, with the One Ring, who is coming over and joining the Free League family. It's going to be published by them hopefully soon, isn't it?
Yeah. Hi, everyone.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us and being here. So we're going to kick this off with a few questions, like Doug said, with general fantasy questions for these gentlemen. Then we're going to go into questions that you're throwing out in the chat and wrap it up from there. So first things first, I want to ask the 3 of you. We all have our ideal fantasy worlds, and nobody's is the same. I'm a child of the 80s. I grew up with He-Man Master Universe, so I like swords and laser guns in my fantasy, and I know a lot of people don't like that, but for me, that's my sweet spot. I want to go around the table here and see, what is your ideal fantasy world? What do you want to see in it? Erik, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, well, I actually got into fantasy gaming in the, I believe, 70s, before you even were born, with the first edition of Dungeons & Dragons, actually. It's called Greyhawk and Chainmail and those supplements. And so that's basically where I started with fantasy, I think. But I had read, of course, the Lord of the Rings books and also Earthsea of Ursula Le Guin. And I think perhaps you come to this, but I think fantasy as such, and also my favorite touch of fantasy is that you can actually add whatever you want into it. You can take. I'm a fan of history, so I can take historical content and I can do something with it in a fantasy context, and I love that. It's you know, it's kind of a blank paper. You can do whatever you like. So that's what I like.
Perfect. It is. I've added like spaceships and stuff. Like Greyhawk did that. I've added that to fantasy. And some people have been like, "Ugh, what is that doing in here?" And it's like, I get it. All right, it's not for everybody. I understand. But it is a blank slate that you can do whatever you want with it, which is beautiful. There's no rules.
No. And if you compare to like science fiction, I think fantasy broader is more built on what we have on Earth. So I like science fiction a lot, but it's more you have to think more what may come. But
right.
in fantasy, you can use whatever had already occurred, actually. So.
Awesome, Mattias. What is your ideal fantasy world setting?
Just to keep this interesting, I think I'm going to answer in a way that kind of contradicts you, Erik.
Okay, go ahead.
Not history, but what I have always enjoyed with fantasy settings is the fact that you can talk about contemporary issues in a way that doesn't feel so very threatening or on the nose or to the point. So my absolute favorite fantasy settings, and possibly all fantastical settings besides the fantasy genre, are they need to deal with or involve conflicts that I can relate to in my day-to-day life. So on a symbolical or allegorical, maybe you call it, level. So that I would say is my, if I'm just allowed to mention one thing.
Yes, please do.
Yeah, that's it.
Awesome.
And I agree with you. I agree with you too.
And Francesco.
And I agree with you, Erik. You know that. I'm just trying to keep this interesting.
Well, in my case, I must say that I'm not probably a huge fan of fantasy as far as fiction is concerned. In general, there need to be something particular there. I mean, there's too much genre fantasy that just is nothing special. Of course, I have my favorites apart from the Lord of the Rings. That is a matter of also the lifetime dedication, because I've been working on games on the Lord of the Rings since 2004 now. And but I think that in general, something that is not really there in the Lord of the Rings, but it is in spirit, is that I need to have some historical connection to the real world. In fact, I think I like more alternative histories rather than plain fantasy. I like when you add a fantastical element to an historical setting, or your fantasy has some strong historical roots, like the Lord of the Rings as mythological and historical roots. So that's my, I don't like it when fantasy is too wild, even if sometimes I feel the frustration of not enjoy that level of freedom where you can invent anything because it's just your own fantasy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, it's all very good points. It is a canvas for you to do whatever you want with it. Your answer, Francesco, is a great segue into the next question, though, regarding fantasy. You said there's a lot of fantasy out there, so it's not necessarily like your go-to or your favorite. So fantasy, I'd say, was probably, I might be wrong here, but the first setting that we saw in this hobby really come to the forefront and has remained at the forefront of this hobby. Do the three of you see this changing And if so, what do you think would dethrone fantasy as like the king of the hill for the role playing hobby? I'm going to start backwards here. I'm going to start with Francesco.
I don't see really the possibility of fantasy being dethroned, because there's so much there that probably is personal. I mean, there's so much you can just create if you embrace fantasy. So you can have very different reasons to write a fantasy novel with different influences. I'm thinking, I mean, talking about novels, not necessarily games, but of course, games, it's the same thing. You can have fantasy novels like Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell by Susanna Clarke, that I think is a masterpiece of fantasy that isn't really fantasy in the normal way you consider it, because it's set in the real world. But of course, it has a completely different fantastical alternate history there. And you can have completely different planets, religions, and creatures. And so it's so much wider than anything else. As Erik was saying, science fiction is more constrained. It's more complicated to tackle than fantasy. So if you are a game master and you're starting to play a game, it's so easy to just have a blank sheet of paper, start drawing a map. You invent a continent, you invent a city, you invent ancient wars and ancient races and stuff like that. It's so cool to just let your imagination run.
That's a good point. Yeah, there are no rules when it comes to fantasy. You're free to just create, and you're like, well, that's how it is in my world, right? And that's the only rule, because I want it to be that way. That's true. That's very true. Mattias, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm going to have to be a little bit boring here and say that my answer would depend on what you define as fantasy.
Okay.
I think there are a lot of fantasy games out there that dresses up in high-tech equipment and high-tech garbs. I would, for instance, on at least some level, argue that the Star Wars universe has a very strong connection to the fantasy way of telling tales. And I think, because I've been, and not only me, but we've been discussing this a lot growing up, how come that we always loved the science fiction movies, but always preferred to play fantasy games. And I think it has something to do with the focus of the story. At least most fantasy games, of course, not all of them. And as I said, also some games that pertain to other genres or are ascribed to other genres tend to have a quite clear line of conflict. That is also, it is very often very easy to see an individual who is the main, enemy, while science fiction in large maybe tell stories on a meta scale, on a higher scale, with high politics and systems rather than individuals that you can confront, that you can either try to persuade to come over to the not so very dark side, or you can try to club them in the head if they refuse. So I think there is something. Okay, so now to my answer. I think fantasy, when it comes to role-playing games, will have a quite strong hold over the public in general for a very long time, just because of the kind of stories it facilitates, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. And it's an excellent point with Star Wars is definitely science fantasy. You have swords and wizards and monsters, like all of the traditional fantasy tropes are there, but it's just in a space setting. You're 100% correct. Whereas like a Star Trek is, to me, is a science fiction, because it's about science and how it works and how it would function in a future setting. And you don't have, well, you probably have swords and magic. I don't know enough about Star Trek, but Star Wars, I could talk all day about.
I besides Symbaroum, I work with one of our other brands called Coriolis,
yes,
which is a fantasy game. It's a science fiction game, but that is also very highly, it is mainly designed to tell stories of exploration and involves conflicts that you would normally, at least to some extent, find in most fantasy games. So, and we just released a new adventure model, so that's why my mind wanders off to Coriolis. Sorry for that, but I would argue that we can talk about Coriolis in some senses as a fantasy game as well.
For sure. I've run the first part of the Mercy of the Icons adventure, and yes, I can confirm there is a lot of fantasy in that as well. And I'm looking forward to part 2 coming out here real soon. Eric, your take. Do you have anything to add to this?
Right, yeah. I think most of the settings you have find in role-playing games like cyberpunk or noir are sort of limited to a setting. They're limited. I think the only one that could challenge fantasy is science fiction. But then again, I think fantasy is more about the small gritty level, some persons trying to overcome challenges, while science fiction, which I find very interesting, is more suited for philosophical and these big ethical questions. Like, for instance, I have these I&M Banks, the culture novels. I really love those because they sort of they put big questions about what if it was like this. But then it is hard to play in a science fiction setting because it gets too big and it's kind of everything is allowed and it's kind of hard to ground it. I think, like Francesco said, that fantasy is basically interesting when it's grounded in something that we can relate to. I think that's a very important point you made there. You can put anything into fantasy. It can swallow anything. But the challenge, and I also wrote some fantasy novels, the challenge is to make it coherent within itself. So you have to be true to what you said before. So that's the hard part about fantasy to me. You create a world, but what you have written and published, you have to stand by that. So you have to sort of fit everything new into that. So you are constraining yourself pretty much right from the start. And that's a challenge, and that also makes you, it's possible to ground it in something. For instance, I have another fantasy setting, not in Forbidden Lands, that is a Renaissance setting. And I always thought, what if we had the Renaissance in a politistic setting? So I made that world politistic, and then you can start thinking, okay, so what would happen when science sort of caught on and so on? And it's basically, what if? So I think, like Francesco said, it has to be grounded in something. It can't be free fantasy because then it becomes very uninteresting very quickly. And you see a lot of, generic fantasy that is really boring. While science fiction is mostly interesting, because they have some interesting philosophical idea. But for role-playing games, I think fantasy is unchallenged. It can contain anything. It can build structures from nothing that are still related to our world. So that's basically my answer.
Very good. Yeah, we all agree on the points, and we all have varied ideas and answers also when it comes to it. And I think that's one of the strengths to fantasy and why it has also remained at the forefront all this time, all these years. What is it, 30, 40 years? 40 plus years since we saw the original games being produced that have brought the hobby to where it is now. I see there are questions being asked in the chat here. Do we have any questions you want to highlight, Doug?
Let me bring some on. I think there's some really great questions that, and actually we were getting some email to us as well. One of the questions that I think is really good is what fantasy novel or book would you say folks should read that kind of that you would kind of recommend for people to, read and kind of get in behind the games that you work on? So, I mean,
Francesco,
it was going so well. It was going so well.
I can start.
All right.
If I'm allowed to modify the question a little bit. Oh, quite a lot, actually.
I'll allow it.
No, I have written a couple of novels in the Symbaroum setting, but they are only published in Swedish, and they are more like, the Symbaroum version of Dragonlance series or something, like more for teens, not for adults such as us. Anyway, we always say that there are actually one TV series and one movie. And that is, I mean, we should encourage people to read, but then you can read the Symbaroum role-playing game books. That's a good idea. And then you can watch Princess Mononoke, and you can watch Game of Thrones. And then you have, the main ingredients of the Symbaroum brew, I would say.
Yeah. That's a really good
Francesco, are there any books?
Yeah.
I can read?
How could we get into the One Ring?
I'll try not to be so obvious. I mean, of course, cannot ignore the source material. And even if we were limited by licensing issues and we could not use anything outside of the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbits and the appendixes to the Lord of the Rings, we had to have more. It might seem enough because, I mean, the Lord of the Rings it's a huge book, and the tapestry, the legendarium that it paints, it's so wide anyway without the need of anything else. But as you all know, when you try to make a world that is depicted in fiction playable, you need more. You need more than just what is in a book that makes a good story. Because players have a sort of a 360-degree view of the world that is not simply what is described in a novel. So we had to go out there and find some other source for describing stuff that isn't directly addressed in the stories, especially because for the game, we wanted to explore those gray areas that Tolkien didn't describe well, because otherwise you would end up just play, second fiddle to the protagonists of the story. You would never feel as heroic as Aragorn and stuff like that if you were going the same places and doing the same things. So that's why in the original version of the game, we moved the focus, the geographical area, to Wildenland. That is the setting for the Hobbit story, but you don't see much of that beyond that. So we explored it with supplements. And for example, one of the things that I suggest to read are the books by William Morris. William Morris was a sort of a Renaissance man that made everything in his life. Among the things he did was writing historical novels set in the forests of Germany and in fantasy places. Tolkien, when he was young, he said, I want to write stories similar to what William Morris does. And in fact, he did. Because if you read The House of the Wolfings, that is a novel by William Morris, or The Roots of the Mountains, you find immediately at home if you're a Tolkien reader, because the language that William Morris uses and the way of describing things is so much Tolkien that sometimes you feel that it's even too much. Like Tolkien exploited the fact that William Morris novels were not so popular, so he could steal.
Borrow.
So that it's like when you read that, it's like finding some apocryphal writing by Tolkien. And for example, we based the whole woodman culture in first edition, The One Ring, on one of the cultures described in The House of the Wolfings by Morris. So cool. Yeah, that's an out of the box source for The One Ring that is not simply Tolkien.
Very cool. Hopefully, it's opened some folks' eyes to that, and they'll seek out those stories. Eric?
Yeah, the thing, the background, to Forbidden Lands was that I got these old illustrations from the 80s and 90s from a Swedish role-playing game, the first one, which was very popular at the time, and they wanted me to. I had to use those illustrations, but I could do whatever I wanted with them. So I was, kind of stuck with elves, dwarves, halflings, Ents, goblins, etc. And so what I'm trying to say here is that I had to use the background from this old game, but then I, of course, switched and tweaked it a lot. So it's not, the inspiration to that game is not really from books. But if you want some books in the same flavor, I would say perhaps the Witcher books, which I like a lot. Gritty and dirty, and you're out in the woods, and you have a hard time surviving. And also the magic of the Witcher is somewhat like you use magic, I think, in Forbidden Lands. Not like the magicians use magic, because those are not the same, but pretty much like the Witcher, I believe. And then, of course, one of my inspirations that lived with me all the time is Clark Ashton Smith, which was a sort of pal with H.P. Lovecraft. Really dark stories about necromancy. Those are the ones I like. So when it comes to necromancy and dark arts and doom on a sort of existential level, I go to Clark Ashton Smith. So that's what I could recommend.
Awesome. Clark Ashton Smith is criminally overlooked. I'm big into Howard. So Conan and all that stuff, and Clark Ashton Smith's in that camp, and a lot of people don't look at his stuff. So
and they're free online, so you can read them for free. They're online. Actually, I can put out the link here in the comment to the YouTube channel later if you like.
William Morris too. William Morris also is free online.
Another question we got asked was, since all of you have spent a large percentage of your lives working with fantasy in fantasy settings, what was the major drive behind that? Like, what's the appeal for you with fantasy to make you want to just like make this a large part of your lives, both just creatively?
Does anybody want to volunteer to tackle that one first?
No, I can start.
Oh, go ahead, Mattias.
I think it's because I'm somewhat of a coward. Let me clarify. I like to tell stories, and if I can write those stories in a way where they are, I love role-playing games as a medium for storytelling, where basically as a writer, my job is to inspire and provide interesting, hooks for the gaming group to catch on to, and they tell their own story. I want to tell stories that matter to me. Stories that tie into, questions that I struggle with every day. It can be existentialistic questions, like the ones found in many science fiction games, but it can also be, the one of the I would say main themes of the fantasy genre is. Correct me if you think I'm wrong, guys, but you know, the question of good versus evil, the light and the dark, that sort of questions, and those are much easier to deal with when hiding them in a fantasy garb, hiding them as a story, as a fantasy story, rather than making it as about the reality we see every day around us. So I think that's where I started getting lured into writing fantasy and reading fantasy and watching fantasy, and you know, I love the fact that I can talk about really important stuff and hide it from the people that would hate me for saying what I say.
Good point. Francesco or Erik, want to tackle this one next?
For me, I don't see myself much as a writer. I'm more of I see myself as a game designer mainly. I'm working on role-playing games because and fantasy, because my passion for the two things flourished at the same time. I've always been a gamer since I was very young, playing war games and stuff. So I encountered role-playing games very early on. And to me, role-playing games were the perfect match of my two interests, because they allowed me to indulge in creating from the point of view of a narration, if you want, and on the other side as a game designer. So and I think that I was exposed to the two things at the same time, because I was very young when I attempted to read The Lord of the Rings, and then I was able to overcome the first chapter only when I got a fever, and I had to stay for a couple of weeks in bed. Otherwise, I couldn't go over the long expected party. And then I was playing games at the same time. So yeah, I just made 2 + 2 and started. I wanted to do something creative, and I was writing stories, but I found it hard. I think it was difficult to break through there. I was writing and participating in contests for screenplays with some limited success. But when I started applying myself very much to game design and role-playing games, I really saw that was my way, my direction. Eventually, I published the first thing in the early 90s. My first game was out in 1993. And it was like 3 or 4 years after I started actually trying to do it professionally.
Cool. Funny side story about discovering Lord of the Rings young. I found the second book in the Lord of the Rings trilogy at the library, and I was like, "What's this?" I took a librarian. She's like, "Oh, that's part of this series of books." She's like, "Let me check to see if we have the first one." She's like, "Well, we don't have it right now. You can start with the second one. It'll be okay." And I was like, it like ruined it for me for years. I was like, "What is going on? Who are these characters? What's happening?" Librarian.
That librarian needs to be fired.
Right?
I'm saying it right now.
Why would she do that to me? Sorry, Erik.
Yeah, I see myself more as a writer than as a game designer. I had published a novel already when Dungeons & Dragons came to Sweden very early. And I stumbled into this game through a friend, and I was, just swept away by this. What can I do? Whatever I like. I'm sure you experienced the same thing when you started with RPGs. And then after a year or so, I became Dungeon Master, and then I started to make my own world. And then this game came to Sweden. It's called Dragons and Demons in Swedish, which was very big. I mean, I think perhaps half of the young teenage boys played it at the time. And then I had this material already, and I asked the guys who published this game to, do you want me to write this into an adventure? And they said, sure, do that. So I wrote this first adventure, which is called Svavelvinter, the Winter of Sulfur in English. And this was in 1986. And the strange thing is that has lived with me ever since, because it was the first one in a series of games that became pretty popular. And then I wrote novels from the same story. So I published 4 novels in this setting. And then it was actually Free League's first game, called Svavelvinter, is based on the novels. So it's kind of stuck with me, this fantasy. I read more science fiction than I do fantasy, actually. But I mean, it's very good. Fantasy is very good, like I said, to put whatever you want into. Like in my novels, I have a lot of philosophical questions that I like to investigate. So, and then when this nostalgic project came up, they asked me, because I'm an old fart in this game, so they asked me to do this, and I said, sure, why not? And now I got absorbed into the Forbidden Lands world. I'm actually considering writing novels in that world now, which would be nice, because I sort of got drawn into it. When you start building the setting, it gets deeper and deeper, and you get more and more invested and interested in it yourself, and it sort of pulls you in.
Please write some Forbidden Lands novels.
Yeah,
I would like to
do
read
that.
those. Like I said, it's my favorite game for Free League, and I love it. I would love to see some more lore.
So one question that we had was that there are a lot of fantasy RPGs on the market and in the hobby. What about your game or games sets them apart from other games on the market? And it can be either mechanics or setting or whatever you'd like to. What do you think makes your game or setting special?
We're gonna go backwards this time. I'm gonna start with Erik. I'll put him on the spot.
Yeah, I don't know many other games. I'm not that a big gamer, actually, but I think what I hear and what I think about the Forbidden Lands, it's that it's very, very open. You can sort of do whatever you like in it. And when I write an adventure site, I try to do it so you can solve it by going in with your arms, so you can solve it by chickening out or fooling somebody into something. So it's extremely open-ended, and I think that might set it off a little. The rules are obviously very good. I didn't do those, but I think we got a very good merge with the setting and the rules there. So they're pretty simple, and it's pretty straightforward. It's very dangerous, and you can try whatever you like. It's not tied really to any story. It doesn't have to go either way. I think that might be what sets it off.
Yeah, I would agree. It's a blank slate. You have this map, you have these legends, and it's like, all right, put them wherever you want. Do whatever you want with them. Make it your own. But all this stuff's there, so you have all the tools, and you just kind of drop it wherever you want.
Yeah, and then you can also side with the bad guys or the good guys. And also, did try to do in the setting is that if you're with the elves, there are several fractions of elves. Some not so nice as some very nice, and also with the orcs or the dwarves, you can always pick a side, whatever you are actually.
Mm-hmm.
So and that makes it more interesting and like our world, I think, as well.
Very much so. Very much so. Francesco.
Well, if we're talking about the One Ring, I think, of course, apart from just saying that it's based on the Lord of the Rings, it's the fact that I think that the game actually manages to make you play in Middle-earth. I mean, there were other games before that tried to summon the spirit and to invoke the atmosphere, the mood of what it means to play in Middle-earth rather than any other fantasy setting. And it seems that we succeeded in bringing up the theme and what makes interesting to play in a world like that. For example, when I was younger and I was playing other games, I played Middle-earth role-playing by Iron Crown, and to me something didn't click because the game wasn't, to me, actually allowing you to play Middle-earth. It seemed like a sort of of a Middle-earth clone. It was a fantasy world that resembled Middle-earth, but wasn't actually making me feel I was there. It seems, at least from the success that the One Ring had and the opinion of many players, that the mechanics that we created for the One Ring actually allow you to really feel you're playing in Middle-earth. So I think that it was a very big challenge, and that we got it at least partially right if people are enjoying it.
I know, I would agree. That's like the one universal thing that I've seen about the One Ring, the previous editions, is that it nails that Middle-earth feel, and like you're actually playing in that universe. And you guys did so much research in those books to make it playable, like you had mentioned previously. Mattias.
Okay, so I'm going to have to go a little meta here. I think what makes Symbaroum stand out, maybe I'll come back to give you some examples of it, but what makes it stand out may be the fact that it has been the setting, the art style, and the rules have been designed by a trio of guys who have known each other for over 3 decades. We have played games together. Among them, of course, Erik's Svavelvinter campaign, which has had an enormous impact on us as you know, creative guys, and also especially when it comes to role-playing games. And the fact that we know each other so well and cooperate so well, I think, makes Symbaroum into a game where you feel that the rules, the setting, and the art and the style of the game is truly one whole. And that is something that a lot of people playing the game actually pinpoint as one of its main features.
I agree. Yeah, it's all about that setting. It's all about Davokar. Am I saying it right?
Yeah, Davokar. Yeah,
Davokar.
I should give a little more specific answer. I could say, as from my perspective as the setting and adventure writer, or one of the adventure writer and the main setting designer, is that the whole game, and we often do this. We have designed a number of games over the years together, and the game setting has been designed to tell a certain story. Which also makes it, and the story being the Throne of Thorns, which will be a 6-part super epic campaign. I'm just starting to, or not just starting, but I'm writing the 5th episode right now. And since the setting has been designed with that kind of story arc in mind, it is also, I believe, it has very clear conflicts that are easy to use if you want to create your own adventures or your own campaigns. It is a game that you obviously can play without playing, you know, the Symbaroum version of Enemy Within or Erik's Svavelvinter. You can design your own adventures and whatnot. But the fact that we in this case have designed the game with a certain story in mind makes it very clear the conflict lines that you have to play with, and in some senses the rhythm of the game and the stories to be told in that setting. You mentioned Davokar. That's obviously the heart of it, and maybe one of the things that makes it stand out. It centers around a massive, very, very dark forest that you are supposed to go into and to explore.
Oh, exactly. One of my friends who may bring this, I'm hoping, to the Twitch channel in the near future, has the idea of, instead of playing, you know, the humans and the beings going into the forest, instead flipping it and being the things in the forest and pushing back at the humans making their way in.
You mean playing the good guys for once?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
The good guys in Symbaroum.
Instead of humans, yeah.
Exactly. So I'm trying to convince them to get that over on the Twitch channel in the coming months.
Would be really cool to see.
So we're kind of running out on time, but Olaf has a great question, and I think we'll probably use this one as probably the last question of the session. Let's just, it says, Olaf asks, how do you as designers handle leveling up? I mean, when characters grow and gain experience, should they become superhuman or stay within human limits, mechanics-wise?
Let's start with the game designer, and me and Erik try to
Can pick something up there.
Yeah.
Well, of course, it depends totally on the game. I mean, I generally worked on games that could be seen as low level. So in comparison to other games that are much higher level. So to me, leveling up is more a matter of giving more options to the players, not exactly seeing them go over the roof in power level. And if they, I mean, I'm not seeing in a game like the One Ring set in the third age of Middle Earth the possibility of having characters starting up fighting goblins and then end up arm wrestling with trolls. So there's a level of coherence to be kept there. If we were talking about a first age game, then we could have elves that start up as green adventurers and end up fighting with balrogs. But it's the third age, so we cannot do that. So I'm thinking more in game terms of offering a spectrum of possibilities to the players, choosing different paths. For example, in the One Ring, you can buy ranks in valor rather than wisdom because you want to be recognized more as a heroic slayer of enemies rather than a wise one of the wise. So it's really more choosing different things that are on the table for you rather than just becoming more powerful. Of course, if it was another type of fantasy game, then I would like to. I mean, I like the fact that D&D, for example, in theory, would allow you to do that, to start as a lowly adventurer killing giant rats, and you end up fighting against demigods. That's very cool. Maybe the fiction doesn't go really hand in hand with the premise, but the idea is nice if there was a world there that really supports the concept.
To me, as a player, leveling up or experience, gaining experience and learning new things and becoming better at things, that has always been a drive to play for me, and I know that it is for many. But then I totally agree with you, Francesco. It's very much a question of what kind of tone you want to set in your game. In Symbaroum, for instance, you and your party of heroes can become very heroic, almost as heroic as in Dungeons and Dragons. In the end, on the other hand, Symbaroum is extremely deadly, so the foes level up in the same way. So I don't know. Was the question if we enjoy the concept of leveling up, or would rather just tell stories about pig farmers killing rats?
Yeah. How do you as designers handle quote-unquote leveling up? Grow and gain experience, should become superhuman or stay within their limits?
No, I think to me personally, the superhuman thing has never really interested me. No, I like the stories to be about humans. Yeah.
Yeah, and in the Forbidden Lands, I don't do the rules first, but I think it's gritty and it's deadly, and you can expect to die basically any day. So you learn a lot of stuff, and you can become good at things, but you can still die pretty easily. Also, there's a thing about the world in this respect, that there are no big power structures in the Forbidden Lands. There are not even any big cities. And so you don't really have a big organization to serve. You have to build it for yourself, your stronghold, and then try to expand perhaps. But it's more a game made for, low-level scum, I would say.
And the game clearly says that when you open it. It's like, you are not a hero. Yeah. You're a coward. You're a thief. You're whatever. I always like to phrase it like you're running from something. Your past. Maybe you're a criminal. I don't know. And you're going into this strange, untamed world that's been cut off.
Absolutely. Beowulf says, I like to see characters level, quote unquote, through establishing themselves in the world, building relationships, alliances, getting strongholds, etc., not just getting new abilities. And
a good point.
That's
good point.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to say it. All right, we are just at time. Does anyone have any last minute comments or anything they'd like to add before we sign off?
I was thinking, will there be, if people want to discuss something afterwards, can they do that in the comment field or something? Or
absolutely.
On forum perhaps?
Yep. Absolutely. If folks would like to join or ask more questions, feel free to leave them in the chat of this video. I'm sure everyone will keep an eye on that. And I know Free League has forums online that you can check. Just go to freeleaguepublishing.com, and there are forums there for folks to ask additional questions. If folks would like more, to follow everyone online, where should they go? Erik, I'll let you go with you. Are you active on social media? Yeah, sure. But I mean, I follow the forums at Free League's forum. You go to their place, to the forum, and I will in the Forbidden Land section, and I will often answer questions. And we had good discussions that inspire me as well. So I like to have these discussions because I get ideas from your ideas. So, and I also have a Facebook page if you want to go there and so on. So I'm pretty easy to find. Excellent. Francesco?
Yeah, I'm less active as I would like to be these days on social media. I intend to follow the forum for Free League more than I'm doing right now, but I have a good excuse because I'm very much very deep in crunch mode right now to finish off the new edition of the game. So I'm trying to find as few distractions as possible to just get the thing done. And we're almost there. So you don't need to be worried. But I'll be more active again as I was in the past on my Facebook page and eventually on the Free League forum.
Mattias?
Yeah, if you want to ask questions or discuss Symbaroum, I would recommend the subreddit Symbaroum, which has a really lively community with lots of guys that are always interested to discuss this and that. There are also a couple of Symbaroum forums on Facebook, and also the Free League forum. There is a Symbaroum section, which is, I think, and I blame Reddit for this. The Free League forum is just starting up. But please, you're welcome there to help us build it even further.
Well, that's great that when a community sees a need and creates their own answer, that's always a good thing, And I think that's really a great great thing. Of course, Matt, if folks want to see more of you'll be on the Free League, the fan driven Twitch channel that you do. Do you want to tell folks a little bit more about that before we sign off?
Sure. You can find us on Twitch. We're at twitch.tv/Free League Publishing. We're easy to find. Just look up Free League Publishing, and that's the home of Free League over there on Twitch. Tonight, in about 8 hours' time, I think, I'll be running Alien Destroyer of Worlds. We have lots of guests doing stuff on there. We're Symbaroum tomorrow. We have Forbidden Lands on Saturday. We have more Alien on Saturday. We have some Vaesen going on Monday nights, and lots more people coming on board to run games. And I want to have all of these people, all 4 of you, on the channel at some point as well, because we're going to have a new show starting up here in the next coming weeks. And then I'd like to have all of you on there to discuss and talk about your games. That would be amazing. And if you want all the latest news or anything like that for the channel, you can also follow me on Twitter. It's at Jowzam3, JOWZAM3. And there's the schedules posted every Sunday on there for the channel, what you can expect.
All right, excellent. Well, I want to thank everyone that was a part of this panel. Thank you so much for giving your time. Of course, it's our greatest asset, and I appreciate you giving yours to this session. Thank you to everyone that tuned in. If you'd like to see more Free League content here on YouTube, please hit that like button down below, and also hit that subscribe button with a little bell notification. That'll let you know every single time we go live or upload new content. And we've got another session coming up here in just a little bit. We've got Matthew from the Effect Podcast running a session of Vaesen coming here shortly, which will be amazing. He's got an amazing cast, so please stick around for that as well. Thank you, everyone. Be safe, be well, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Bye-bye.